you can change many of your secondary sex features.
When I nip to the loo tonight on the way home at Euston, if I go in the men's, it's...
Oh, why is it always trans men saying this? No one cares about you when it comes to toilets. I keep saying this. It seems like these people that are in high positions in these like trans rights advocacy groups, they're all morons.
What's also unclear is what they even mean by biological sex.
Definition appears at the very top of the judgment under the heading Terminology. Here's what it says. We use the expression biological sex to describe the sex of a person at birth. What's the alternative? We go by gender identity? Well, how do you show gender identity? You can't. You believe what people say. What if they're lying? What if they're insane?
I love you, Mary.
We've got Novara media. UK Supreme Court has ruled legal definition of woman as biological. I would imagine we're going to be more pro-trans on here. I think that, what's that person called? No Justice or something? Like, they seem like a leftist, like, shill, but admittedly, I haven't really watched much of their stuff. I think they associate with Kevin Logan, and I think he sucks, to be quite honest, but that's me. Let's have a look. Let's see what Novara media are saying about all of this. Like, this is pretty left-leaning media, as far as I understand.
The question of whether the Equality Act grants trans women the same protections as cisgender women has been winding its way through the British legal system for years now. Today, it came to an end as the country's highest court issued its decision. Deputy President of the Supreme Court, Lord Hodge, announced the ruling this morning.
The unanimous decision of this court is that the terms woman and sex in the Equality Act 2010 refer to a biological woman and biological sex.
Can I just say, based?
But we counsel against reading this judgment as a triumph of one or more groups in our society at the expense of another. It is not.
I look great in a MAGA hat. I don't own a fucking MAGA hat. I never will. I mean, if someone wants to edit me with a fucking MAGA hat, then go ahead, I guess.
Now, the history of this case is a little bit complicated. On the one side was the Scottish government in 2018.
Listen, I said that I moved pretty far away from all these like far leftist types. I'm still like liberal. I haven't moved like very far right at all. I haven't like overcorrected, I don't think.
MSPs tried to pass a law enforcing gender balance on public sector boards by applying quotas for women members. Now, in the original legislation, Holyrood said that the quota could include people who were living as a woman and who either had gone through or planned to...
Yeah, see, to me, this is messed up. Like, you're basically saying men can take women's places. And I never wanted to be that. I don't want to replace a woman, you know what I mean? I just want to be myself.
Go through the gender recognition process. But campaign group For Women Scotland argued that interpreting woman in that way undermined the rights of women as laid out in the UK government's 2010 Equalities Act. Now, in 2022, For Women Scotland took the Scottish government to court and won, with judges ruling that the categories of biological women and trans women were distinct under the Equalities Act. In response, the Scottish government tightened up the law, now saying that trans women only with a gender recognition certificate should be legally recognised as women for the purpose of these quotas. Then For Women Scotland took them back to court. In December 2022, the group lost, with another Scottish court ruling in favour of the government.
To be clear, I think this is the right decision. Like, literally, you're saying that male people can now just take women's spaces that are supposed to be, you know, these diversity quotas. They're meant to be ensuring that enough women get, like, positions in places. But now we're basically saying that that's not true, because a man can take that woman's place. No, Mary, as the TRAs would say, you're far right, apparently. I get called far right. I get called far left occasionally, but it's usually far right. It's not true. I don't know. I don't know what far right shit I push. I agree with the far righters on a few things. Most people agree with a mixture of both. I hate to break it to whoever.
Government. Now, according to that ruling, trans women with a gender recognition certificate were women under the terms of the Equality Act, and it's that decision that's been overturned today. And the Supreme Court was clear that it saw its job as resolving a legal tension between two big pieces of Westminster legislation. On the one hand, you've got the 2004 Gender Recognition Act, which allows trans men and women to have their chosen gender identity legally recognised. On the other...
By the way, make sure you like the stream. Have you liked the stream? You can scroll down and click the like button. Help me in the algorithm. You want to take your support one step further? You can donate via Streamlabs. You can have your message read out. You can join me on Twitch. I'm monetized on Twitch, but not on YouTube. You can follow me on Patreon. You can support me for a few dollars a month. You can join my Discord, possibly. Someone said the link was broken and I can't fix it right now, so soz if that's the case. You can also check out some music that I've made. You can buy, you can stream. Fully agree. I'd say I'm politically homeless. I'm left-leaning and liberal, but the whole gender ideology and crazy reactionary attitude about sex makes me shake my head. Yeah, I kind of feel that. I don't know. I'm not... A lot of people shit on, like, Labour and Keir Starmer. Honestly, I'm kind of okay with them for the most part. I think I agree with a lot of stuff that's been going on, and things are starting to make sense again in some ways. So I guess we'll see. We'll have to keep watching. But yeah.
You've got the Equality Act 2010, which uses the word woman in a way that has been interpreted by one side as meaning just women who were born female, and by the other side as including women with gender recognition certificates. The law might have been clarified today, but that doesn't mean its implications are clear. And the BBC seems to think it could have limited impact, really. So this is sort of their explainer of what the impacts of this ruling could be. So they say the application of the law on the ground in real life was clearly foremost in the minds.
So I'm now watching Novara Media talk about this whole thing. We're still on the Supreme Court stuff. Probably will be the whole stream. Novara Media is like significantly further left than someone like myself, for example.
The judges take the example of single-sex spaces and services, part of the motivation for 4 Women Scotland bringing this case. The previous reading of the law was that everything from hospital wards and prison wings to support groups for victims of abuse can exclude everyone but women, thanks to exceptions in the Equality Act 2010. The concern from campaigners was that if people could change their sex with a certificate and then claim protection against discrimination as women, that could be more complicated. So I think they mean sort of cisgender women here, which is sort of the Equality Act had those carve-outs. And then they say that's particularly the case on a practical level, given those providing these services aren't actually meant to ask to see a gender recognition certificate. They go on. Now the court is clear that this exemption can continue. The rules underpinning women-only spaces can exclude people with gender recognition certificates. There are still conditions which need to be satisfied. Services will have to show that excluding trans people is a limited and proportionate means to achieving a legitimate aim. Blanket bans are discouraged. There is still a bar to clear. So they seem to be suggesting all this means is that a trans woman with a gender recognition certificate can't claim to have been discriminated against as a woman if they are excluded from a women's-only space, if that organisation can justify by some other means. So from this BBC analysis, it doesn't seem like much practically has changed. Other people's analyses differ, and the campaign that brought the case especially seem to be viewing the ruling as a massive victory outside the Supreme Court in London. Supporters of 4 Women Scotland, and that's a group that brought the case, were jubilant, singing victory songs while drinking champagne. Trina Budge of that group told Sky News how she understood the ruling.
The judge says this is not a victory for either side and it needs to be sober. What's your take on this?
Oh, it's absolutely a victory for women's rights. This case was always about women, never about trans rights, who, as Judge Hodge said, that they are fully protected in law still. But now we have clarity over what a woman means in law.
Yeah, we're starting to understand what that last caller for James O'Brien was saying. It's being like framed around trans people. It's not necessarily fair to do. It is ultimately framed, it should probably ultimately be framed around women, you know? And like I said, I understand. I don't think I agree necessarily. I wouldn't be there popping the champagne myself, and not just because I don't really drink, but like ultimately some of these people, I mean, you saw Maya Forstater there getting like sued, losing, having to appeal and then winning, like stuff like that. Some of these people have been through quite a lot for saying really not much of anything, you know what I mean?
And this has been a long road to here, hasn't it? What does this change as of today? Because there's lots of...
I think of it this way. If you'd said something that you got fucking pilloried for years for, and then ultimately you were proven right, and people had to kind of suck that up because it was legally bound or something, you'd maybe want to celebrate yourself, right? So I do understand it.
Legal talk, there's lots of discussion around what actually changes here as a result of this. In your view, what does that mean?
It means there's absolute clarity in law regarding what a woman is. We know for sure now that we are referring to the biological sex class of women, and that when we see a women-only space, it means exactly that. Just women, no men, not even if they have a gender recognition certificate.
So that's a quite expansive reading of this ruling. So you're suggesting that this now means that any women's space is only for people who were born biologically female. As I say, other analysis doesn't necessarily concur with that, and campaigners for trans rights have been understandably very troubled by the decision. This was Che Brown of rights group Transactual.
On a personal level, I woke up this morning as a transgender man, so someone that was given the label female at birth, but I know myself to be a man. I've got legal recognition.
I know myself to be a man. Can you see why that doesn't work? Can you see why you can't just say, I know myself to be a man? By the way, Transactual, why do I recognize them? Oh, they spoke about the cast review. Of course, they did a thing about the cast review. The cast review is bad science, should not be taken something. The cast review is fundamentally flawed. They had so many things about this. Bad science and should not be taken something seriously by policymakers, by Transactual editor. No one even wanted to put their name on this. I can't remember. Listen, I think I looked at this at the time. We'll suspend judgment because I'm not really going through this now. But you can't just know that you can see why knowing that you're really a man doesn't really have any legal binding, doesn't really have any standing, wouldn't really be able to be used as a defense for anything or an explanation for anything. Like, you know you are what? I mean, this is what I mean. Your gender identity starts and ends in your head, ultimately.
I know myself to be a man. I've got legal recognition. Legally, I'm male.
Wait, how can this be true? If legally you're not a woman, if you have a gender recognition certificate and you're a male to female, would the reverse not also be true? I don't think that's actually... Yeah, I don't know. I don't know, bro. I think legally you might not be a male anymore. And physically you're not one either, unfortunately.
And now this case, even for someone like me that does this sort of looking into our rights and protections for a job, I'm lost questioning what are my rights and protections.
Well, look at the part about gender reassignment. All of your rights are in there. This person seems a bit stupid, no offence.
When I nip to the loo tonight on the way home at Euston, if I go in the men's, it's...
Oh, why is it always trans men saying this? No one cares about you when it comes to toilets. Because if you go into the men's and start kicking off, the men are probably confident they can handle themselves. They're not scared of you. The difference is women can be scared of men in enclosed spaces. No one cares about the men in the fucking men's toilets. I'm sorry about it, bro. Stop trying to make it about yourselves. No one cares about you in this instance.
Someone going to tap me on the shoulder and tell me, you're not allowed to be in here, you're trans?
Well, no, because they're not going to notice. The other thing is, it doesn't matter if you pass well enough, it doesn't matter. And men don't care anyway. You're legally male, yet you know nothing about men. You know nothing about the male experience somehow. It's bizarre.
You should be in the women's toilets. You know, what? We're really unclear. And quite frankly, trans people are terrified. I've seen, you know, lots in group chats that I'm in, people...
Yeah, how much are they terrified because of all the scaremongering running around?
Talking about, this is the time to leave the country. Most trans people that I know already have in the back of mind.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. You're losing your shit. You should be reassuring each other. Reassuring each other that you still have protections under the gender reassignment section.
Where it is they will move to. And given that a lot of the language that was used to argue the appeal and previous appeals, a lot of the language is very Trumpian in terms of talking about...
Trumpian, meaningless.
Even down to whether someone produces eggs or sperm. Is that...
That's not Trumpian, that's biological. That's biology. Oh, where do these people come from? Director of operations. I keep saying this. It seems like these people that are in high positions in these like trans rights advocacy groups, they're all morons. What is this person on?
What we're boiling ourselves down to as people, you know, our capacity or not to reproduce.
Well, no, it's about our capacity or not to reproduce. Male and female are your biological reproductive functions. You're either the big gamete producer or the small gamete producer. That isn't Trumpian language. That is biological language. What are you fucking on about? If you don't know anything about biology, why are you talking about this?
And
it's not like you're not reducing people down to that. You're saying that particular categorization, you are this or you are that. That's not saying everything in your life boils down to whether you have this or that. It's for the purpose of that specific characterization, because you're male or female. Being a male or being a female does not define literally every single part of your life. What a moron. I hope he goes away soon. This is like actually triggering me.
And all of this, and yet in the judgment itself, I'm left wondering still what is meant by biological sex. Is it meant my chromosomes? I couldn't tell.
I don't know anything about this, so let me just ask a bunch of dumb questions. All you're doing is asking dumb questions.
Tell you what my chromosomes are, whether it's XX or whether it's...
You can intuit. I love how people do this. Oh, you don't know my chromosomes. This is why trans people get away with pretending they're intersex when they're not. And they shouldn't be doing that. It's gross. People who have intersex conditions have actual problems. You know, these conditions aren't typically fun to live with, I imagine.
It's something else. Is it my hormone levels? Hormonally, my testosterone's in the male range. Is it my genitals? Without going into too much information, you wouldn't class me as having female genitals. You know, what is it?
You've had a phalloplasty. Well, you don't have male genitals either. You used to have female genitals. You've like nullified your sex, I guess, but you don't become male. You don't become biologically male. Like, there are so many easy answers to all these questions this person is asking. Like, I have a feeling whenever anyone tries to explain anything to them in this sense, they just shove their fingers in their ears. There's no way. How can you go this long on Earth and not have any kind of conception of this whatsoever? We've become completely retarded on, like, sex. I'm sorry. This is what happens when you pretend that sex isn't a real thing for the purposes of, like, satiating people's feelings. People end up becoming extremely stupid on this subject.
Is it the legal recognition that I've had for a few years, and the law for our recognition has been in place for 25 years, the Equality Act has been in place for 15 years, and then suddenly...
Yeah, humans have existed for a fucking hell of a lot longer than that, my dude.
Despite there not being any...
The thing about, like, hormones in male levels, well, male testosterone levels vary wildly as well.
Specific incidents that people are pointing to in relation to this case, with trans people who are suddenly thinking, hang on a minute, have I had some rights taken away from me?
It's a really interesting contribution. And I do think this idea that...
I don't think he's listened to or read the verdict either, because they lay out that there are still protections. It's like these people just haven't fucking listened and now want to pop off. Like, you're director of operations at Transactual. Thank you so much, whatever your name just was. I never have to take that organization seriously ever again. Not that I ever probably did, but thank you. You're all clueless. I know now. Thank you. Anyway.
Because so much of the debate, I suppose because the debate was about self-ID for such a long time, was about people saying it's about biology versus identity. But obviously, biological sex is, you can change many of your secondary sex features, right? So
yeah, but you can't change... Oh my God, are we really going to do this? You can change some of your secondary sexual characteristics. As a male, you can acquire one of women's secondary sex characteristics, that being breasts, by putting on enough weight, by getting fat. That's not a sex change. There's many ways you can acquire the other sex's secondary sex characteristics without changing your sex, without having any kind of identity. You're still a man or you're still a woman.
How much testosterone or how much estrogen you have in you, that is biological, and trans people will have the hormones of the gender they identify with.
Yeah, what he's leaving out here is that you artificially change your, like, hormone level. It's not natural. So it's not like how it would have been. You have to, like, artificially change it to make it that way. So that, that doesn't mean that you are the thing.
So it doesn't seem as simple to me as some people suggest when they say biological sex versus the gender you identify as. The debate about the meaning...
I think this guy is intentionally being a bit stupid. I'm sorry. There's no way you haven't thought this through. There's no way. You must be trying to satiate someone with this shit. Is he serious? Is this serious? I don't think I'm going to get through much of this, because this is actually, like, pissing me off.
Meaning of the ruling has, of course, made its way to Twitter. Former Labour MP Harriet Harman was involved in the drafting of the Equality Act. That's what was under discussion here. She posted this response to the Supreme Court ruling. The Supreme Court ruling correctly interprets the Equality Act, giving effect to our intention when drafting it. Single-sex spaces for women are important and can exclude trans women, but only where necessary. The Act and ruling protects rights of women while also respecting the rights of trans women. So she seems to be suggesting this doesn't really change much. It's still the case that automatically women's spaces should include cis and trans women, unless there's a sort of specific reason why trans women shouldn't be included. Guardian journalist Sonia Soda disagreed with Harman's interpretation, saying this isn't quite correct. As a matter of law, service providers need to justify a space or service being female only. They don't need to justify the exclusion of anyone male from a female only space. On top of that, if you can't justify it being female only, it's mixed sex. Sonia Soda.
Even conditions like PCOS that make women produce more testosterone literally have the word ovaries in the name. They're still women. Yeah. Some people will call that an intersex condition, which is nuts.
Is a gender-critical journalist. I think she writes a lot about this. Someone who is siding with Soda's reading of this judgment is Dragon's Den star and gym chain owner Duncan Bannatyne. He tweeted this: I hope all gym owners will join me now in agreeing that single-sex spaces for women means biological women. No gym should ever allow men into women's changing rooms. Helena, I suppose let's begin with sort of the legal implications, because I've read the sort of analysis from the BBC, from the Times, from the Guardian, sort of what this means. And I feel a little bit none the wiser. It seems like no one really does know what the practical implications of this ruling by the Supreme Court are going to be. I mean, what's your interpretation?
Well, it's in a bit of a limbo case at the moment, as far as I can see, because obviously there is this problem that you have reconciling this judgment with the provisions laid out in the Gender Recognition Act, which say under, I think it's Article 9.1, that anyone who has a gender recognition certificate legally, they're acquired gender, and that also translates to sex as well, right? So once you have a GRC, in legal terms, you get treated as a woman or a man based on what you've transitioned to, not what you've transitioned from. So that's what a lot of this judgment was trying to tease out, and yet so much of the rhetoric and the discussion around it, as far as I can see, only makes this more confusing. Now, from what I understand too, I don't
think it's made it more confusing at all. This guy simultaneously looked like he was both bald and the recipient of a hair transplant. No comment. I'm trying to be nice. I don't know why. I'm trying to be nice. I'm not saying I'm much of a looker myself. Jesus Christ. Anyway.
The Harriet Harman in what we've just seen there is still correct in this case. The Equality Act is very, very clear in saying that you have to give special dispensation, essentially. You have to be able to argue your case to be able to restrict trans women from women's spaces, which was the case already. This was the case before any of the...
Well, I guess the argument is, well, they're not women, so they shouldn't be in the women's space. No. The complication has been, well, are trans women women? And it's like, well, no, they're not.
Rulings today, if you were a female-only space, you could exclude trans women from being in that space as long as you gave a good reason for doing so. That hasn't changed as far as I can see from how this legislation has been brought about.
Okay, I think I disagree with it. I'm pretty sure it being a women's space and trans women not being women, would that not be a good reason? Or a good enough reason, should I say?
The problem I have with the way in which this judgment's been ruled, there was a case that was brought to the European Convention of Human Rights in Strasbourg, or the European Court of Human Rights, ruling upon the ECHR in Strasbourg, which was Goodwin versus the UK, that showed that the UK government had breached the rights of a trans person, as a trans woman in this case, by not being able to adequately give her the legal recognition as a woman. And I believe that she had a GRC as well. So this kind of goes against that ruling there too. And they even mention it in the actual ruling itself that was given by the Supreme Court. They mention a specific case, yet don't, for as far as I can see, give any reason as to why they've been able to get around it either. So there's a lot of unclear designations that's been given here. What's also unclear is what they even mean by biological sex. In the ruling itself, they say, oh, biological...
It's not unclear. You know what biological sex is. I don't know if you all are pretending you don't. You were born male. In the overwhelming vast majority of cases, a biological male has a penis, XY chromosomes, produces sperm, or should be able to, will be able to, used to be able to, etc., etc., etc. Bearing in mind, you can't go from being a sperm producer to an egg producer. That doesn't happen. So you have your answer in the vast majority of cases. There might be a few intersex people that do make it complicated. I imagine there's so few of them that hopefully there can be a case-by-case approach to those kinds of people.
Biological sex is self-evident. And as you saw from that campaigner that we played the video of from the news earlier, well, he was pointing out quite rightly that, well, unless you can give us...
No, that guy was a retard. That guy was talking utter bollocks.
Definition of what this is, then it's going to be difficult not just...
You can go by gametes, genitalia, and genetics. Between those three, you can intuit the vast, vast majority of people's sex. I'm sorry. I know you're trans. I know that other person is trans. I know we have some kind of ideological impetus to pretend sex doesn't exist or pretend that sex is far more complicated than what it is. But it doesn't make sense. It doesn't work. You're a trans woman. I already know that you're a male just from that.
To categorize trans people in terms of the legislation, but intersex people as well, whether you choose what you...
I swear some of these people think that intersex people account for far more people than they do. Like, intersex isn't even a very good term because it only really applies to people whose sex is genuinely complicated or who have maybe some features of both, like hermaphroditism, that kind of thing. Like most DSDs, where you might have like chromosomes that don't really match what you typically expect, you can still put these people into male or female. That probably covers most intersex people, honestly. We are talking about a fraction of the population, like tiny numbers of people, ultimately.
The gametes people produce, whether you look at chromosomes, whether you look at genitalia, phenotype, genotype, all of these different kind of cluster properties that go into the way in which we define sex, these are all things that they haven't declared what one they're going to choose. They've just said, oh, well, it's self-evident. Well, is it really? I mean,
Yes, in the vast majority of cases, yes, it is self-evident. Yeah, Judith Butler, that Ash Sarkar person who I think is like a massive commie. Yeah, it is this kind of thing, you know.
The ECHR, sorry, the EHRC rather, the the Equality and Human Rights Commission could not give a satisfactory definition of what a woman or a man was, of what in terms of biological sex, to the United Nations when trying to give their own justification for the exclusion of trans women. Interesting, again, as always, we talk about trans women here, and trans men just kind of get left out of the conversation so often. But given that the
I feel like these people know why it generally focuses around trans women and just pretend not to. Simple way to fix is to have your biological sex in your ID. That way, so-called masculine women, they keep acting like will be seen as men, won't get seen as men. Hey, maybe, like, most people carry their driving license. People talk about, like, oh, we're going to have to present our papers and stuff like that. Well, I don't know, man. You have to present your ID for plenty of reasons. If there genuinely is that much concern, then it's probably a pretty quick and simple way of sorting it. So maybe that would be a solution. Obviously, people like this are not going to be for that because they're not going to want an M on their driving license. But then we have to talk about, well, is reality what's important or people's feelings?
the EHRC can't give that definition in a complete term. I'm not surprised that the UK Supreme Court haven't either, and just gone with it's common sense, essentially, which is that's not an argument. That's not a reasoned argument. That is just the argumentum populum, essentially. Well, everyone believes this, so it must be true, which obviously, you know.
Well, what's the alternative? Going by gender identity. It's far more well-defined what sex is than what gender identity is. Especially because gender identity is just a thing that you call yourself. Like, it's for some people, it's made up. For some people, it's just, oh, I've decided on this today, so I'm this. Like, or it's something that someone read on the internet. So I don't know, like, what's your alternative? Sex is like the best thing we have for this.
It's far more complex than that when we come down to the actual granular detail of what sex is and how we even perceive of sex within society. It's also difficult to understand how, if it is true that what Sonia Sodia believes is correct and that in most cases trans people will be excluded from single-sex spaces based upon what they've transitioned to, how is this enforceable? It still seems incredibly difficult to enforce. But again,
like I said, it's largely going to be retroactive, I would have thought. People might end up suing for places failing to provide single-sex spaces. Ultimately, it's not very enforceable, but the problem is you don't make laws based on how enforceable they are. It's supposed to be like the lay of the land. It's supposed to be like the principles of the government. Like, you know, you can say it's not very enforceable, but that doesn't change whether it should be there or not. And yeah, it's mostly going to be like retroactive. But these people just ask these questions, knowing that they're getting no answers to these questions, and then they can just spout all this kind of stuff off. It's propaganda, basically.
Because not only are you going to have to, again, essentially be able to clock people, and then this will be weaponized, right? This will be weaponized against non-conforming people of any gender, whether they're cisgender or transgender, to make themselves justify why they should be in a space in the first place in reality. And then on top of this, well, what's stopping a cisgender man? Because again, they want to exclude men from women's spaces for their own protection, right? This is why the spaces exist.
This says... Elena says the judgment doesn't define biological sex. I find this hard to believe, so I checked the judgment. Anyone can find it online. The definition appears at the very top of the judgment under the heading Terminology. Here's what it says. We use the expression biological sex to describe the sex of a person at birth. I get your concerns about the repercussions of this judgment, but why mislead us on this? I'm guessing they're going to take this and be like, yeah, well, how do you know, like, blah, 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 blah. Well, it's like, well, again, in the very overwhelming vast majority of cases, you do know what a person's sex of birth is by just looking between their legs. And that's what happens. Like, how many people get misassigned sex at birth? I wonder, actually. Like, it seems like it's a pretty well-defined thing. It seems like it's pretty, like, settled, you know what I mean? And it only really affects... Like, how often does this happen? There's an AI overview. Take of this what you will. In a small percentage of births, babies may be born with an atypical or ambiguous genitalia, leading to a potential need for additional diagnostic steps or a deferral of sex assignment. Occurs in approximately 1 in 2,000 to 1 in 4,500. While the vast majority of births have unambiguous sex assignment at birth, yeah, so in almost every single case, the sex you're assigned at birth is your sex. It's very rare that this happens. According to Wikipedia even, in the vast majority of cases, 99.95%, sex is assigned unambiguously at birth. Like, how often is someone's sex misassigned? How often is someone called a male when they're born. And then it turns out they're actually female. It's a very rare thing. Unfortunately, quite a few still do, even in Western countries. Well, it happens, but like, it's pretty rare. Well, it's not a biological definition. It's just a definition. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's the best we have. All of our scientific knowledge is not like absolute. And what's the alternative? We go by gender identity? Well, how do you show gender identity? You can't. You believe what people say. What if they're lying? What if they're insane? So what's the alternative? Very few people have read the full judgment. This isn't about informing people, it's about stoking activism. I actually agree with that. I think it's probably the case with these people. Like, they literally took what that fuckwit guy from Transactual said seriously. They showed it in the video, as if anything they said really held water. Nonsense. Extremely common missed in third world countries, where it also occurs more often due to inbreeding. Well, yeah, but I mean, we're talking about the UK, right? How third world countries decide to determine this kind of thing is really up to them. The purpose of the judgment is an adequate definition. It dealt with the issue at hand. Everyone has a birth certificate. Yeah, I think this is fine. It's not going to be perfect, but when is science perfect? We only know so much, you know what I mean? They don't explain which attributes must be used to determine someone's sex at birth. Well, I mean, they do. How do they tell who's is what sex? They look between the baby's legs. And in the very vast majority of cases, they can tell. And you would hope that there'll be some kind of control for those rare people that are misassigned at birth or are sexually ambiguous, you know what I mean? But at that point, if we're talking about a small amount of people, the hope is they can be treated like case by case. Most intersex people or people with dysfunctional sexual disorders literally look exactly like their sex but have hormone problems. Remnants of malformed parts. No human can produce eggs and sperm. Yeah, I've never heard of a case, not conclusively anyway, where someone can produce both. Like that kind of, I don't think it's true hermaphroditism. I can't remember what the term is, but I don't think it's possible. Like humans can't be like snails, for example. And like most like DSDs, like they're things like Klinefelter disease. Not Klinefelter disease, Klinefelter syndrome.
You're anti-trans.
Oh, thank you for watching, Skyrocky20. Thanks for subscribing. Yeah, like things like Klinefelter syndrome, like these kind of things, they're still unambiguously male. Ultimately. Hey, hope you're good. Biological woman means born a female, blah, blah, blah. Like, yeah, we're making this shit way more complicated than it has to be. We're asking a lot of questions that really don't need answering in the vast majority of cases, overwhelming amount of cases, in fact. Today we can test chromosomes, that is true. And nothing is perfect, of course. There are going to be edge cases and people that have like disorders and stuff that make it difficult and complicated. But these people are super rare, you know what I mean?
Exist kind of prima facie in the first place. Well, what's stopping a cisgender man from saying, well, I'm a trans man, you know, you've told me I have to be in this space now. What you're going to inspect my genitals, you're going to make me do a birth certificate to use the loo. This just seems very unworkable.
Well, yeah, I guess, like I said, this kind of thing would happen like retroactively. You'd catch someone, there'd potentially be lawsuit or something like that. It's not easy to enforce, that is fair enough. But that doesn't mean that we should pretend that sex doesn't exist whatsoever and just let people do whatever the fuck they want. Clearly, there's a lot of women out there that have a problem with that. And you have to like reconcile that somehow.
Which is why I think that Harriet Harman's interpretation of this is correct in the first place. You know, making it so that we all understand that trans people have access to these spaces, but there should be provisions for people to be able to make the case that they should be able to exclude them. So whilst I'm not happy with this ruling, I think that on both sides there's been a lot of either celebration or catastrophizing over something that seems the kind of best nuanced and at worst.
I mean, listen, calling out catastrophizing, I do agree with that.
Kind of incoherent. So I'm none the wiser until I see someone more expert with more legal expert.
But I think this person is playing dumb. They're asking a lot of stupid questions that really wouldn't need answering in the vast majority of cases. Sex is very easily categorized for most people, including yourself. You're a male. Well done. I've always thought of it saying humans have two hands as a standard doesn't mean three-limbed people don't exist. They're just an abnormality. Well, yeah, exactly. Not going to be easy to enforce, which I translate to limiting lawsuits like this. Yeah. Trans man would have gender certificate. Often there are classes of disorders too. If you're born with a birth defect, there are often other related defects that are not sex specific. Yeah, true.
But he's trying to untie this for me.
Yeah, I mean, I've been looking all day. It's been surprising sort of how few, even on sort of like Sky News and BBC, they've got lots of advocates for both sides. You've got sort of people who sort of campaign on trans rights issues, sort of often talking about their personal experience. And then you've got people who, from the for women's side, but someone to just sort of say, this is what this will actually mean, has been a bit absent. I think maybe because no one knows at this point. It is an 88-page sort of...
There is an extent to which, yeah, we're going to have to find out, sure. But what it means is, well, women are female, men are male. That's the main takeaway. It's a clarification on something. The idea that it's going to have all these like crazy like ramifications, we don't really know.
Of ruling, isn't it? So it's going to take people a while to sort of look through it all and work out what this sort of fundamentally means. I think also the EHRC, Equality and Human Rights Commission, are going to be putting out some sort of advice to sort of those organisations for whom this might be relevant. It's interesting as well here, isn't it? Because this is, you know, the Supreme Court, everyone keeps saying they've come down with this judgment unanimously, sort of suggesting there was no question.
Well, yeah, it said unanimously. The was it 5 judges? They all voted the same way. So yes, it's unanimous.
Yeah, it's obvious. Of course, this is sort of correct. But so I think in 2022, wasn't it, that this was by a different judge, sort of thrown out of court, and they sided with the Scottish government. So it is clearly the case that human judgment comes in here in terms of how this is interpreted. It doesn't seem like it is a legal open and shut case. I suppose the discourse sort of in the public sphere, the public realm, has changed quite a lot since 2022 to 2025. And you could say that this is an example of how, I suppose, cultural trends influence how, you know, supposedly objective legal jurists come to their conclusion.
Cultural trends. I wonder if we're going to make any kind of acknowledgement of why the culture has changed. What role the trans activist types and like far leftist types have had on this. Because they have their part to play. They have their share of the blame as to why people have turned against like trans, ultimately. So why is the sex disorder the one they single out? Why not have identities based on hearts that are too small and misaligned bones? Listen, I have heterochromia. That's my identity. You can't discriminate against me for having 2 different colored eyes. And I will not hear anything otherwise. But yeah, it's kind of arbitrary. But it's because you can link it to trans, I guess. And it's not unheard of for trans people to pretend that they have some kind of DSD when they don't. There was even like a study on it. Admittedly, it was a small amount of people, but it happens. And I think part of the blame is like all these people that are like, oh, you can't see my chromosomes and stuff like that, even though you can intuit them. And in basically every case, not every case, but the vast majority of cases, a trans woman is male. They have XY chromosomes. You can intuit that shit. I'm okay with intuiting someone's chromosomes and occasionally being wrong about it, because it's not going to happen super often. And it's not the end of the world anyway.
It's going to be working both ways, right?
Well, exactly, yeah. I think that the fact that this has had so much kind of court tennis being played with this specific ruling just shows you how open to interpretation, personal bias that it is. What I think is unsettling, I'm not going to try and decry these people being activist judges or whatever. I think a lot of discussion around it with other rulings has been very frustrating and not particularly based in reality. But what I think is interesting in this specific case with regards to the personal biases of people in question is that when they were choosing people to present arguments in this case, but I think it was Sex Matters, the Lesbian Project and LGBT Alliance, or was it For Women in Scotland as well, were all asked to give some level of evidence to this hearing, if I remember correctly. And yet the only person, or the only group that was seen to provide any evidence that was at least taking the side of trans people in this discussion was Amnesty International. They're just kind of a broad human rights group, you know? They aren't exactly...
The problem is a lot of trans like activist groups are complete morons. Like we heard from one, this transactual. Would you want this person sticking up, like being the one giving evidence towards trans people? This guy seems nuts. He seems like he doesn't know anything about anything. And he's a director of operations at one of these organizations. Like, Jesus Christ. I have a feeling like plenty of the people, they just would have made it worse, if anything.
It was specifically pro-trans, or to take the trans person side of this argument, they're just a general broad...
The other thing is, we're again making the mistake of centering this around trans people when it's centered around what a woman is. It's centered around women, ultimately.
Human rights group. When they're asking for people to give evidence in this case on the gender critical side, you have not just kind of broad human rights organizations, but like explicit gender critical like pressure groups, people who are there, as far as I can see, to agitate with as much kind of lawfare as they possibly can to try and...
I mean, do they know why this is the case? I mean, I'm not saying I do, but I don't know, man.
reduce the rights of trans people. That's my opinion of the way in which they conduct themselves, right? And so the fact that I think this was so one-sided in terms of who was asked to give evidence, I think that shows you...
Yeah, reduce the rights of trans people. This person will not see it as they're like women's rights groups, which to me is accurate. I think it's very bad faith to assume that it's all centered around how much rights trans people have. When what we're talking about is the definition of woman. Why the fuck wouldn't women want to push for their own fucking rights? But no, it has to be about, oh, well, you're trying to lower trans rights. It's a little narcissistic, in my opinion.
At least some degree to which why this judgment has been made in the way that it is. In fact, in the actual ruling itself, they've mentioned Ben Cooper Casey, who was representing for the sex matters, who was included, it was mentioned in this ruling, and saying, well, thank you to this specific Casey for pointing out that we really need to understand what biological sex means, what man and woman means. This is why we've come down in this judgment. Except, of course, having been asked and admitting that they should be trying to give a definition of what biological sex means, when actually pressed on what that means, they say, oh, well, it's common sense in it. This is self-evident about...
Well, it's sex of a person at birth, birth certificate, what is observed at birth. That is a definition. You can pick holes in the definition, and this person is trying to. But like, I don't know, man. I don't know. I'm not entirely convinced that these people read this very closely. We seem to ask a lot of questions that are fairly simple answers, or can be fairly easily intuited if you just turn off the activist part of your brain and think like a rational human being. Yeah, the comments are like mixed. Please, if you want to be treated seriously, don't say stuff like this. You don't know what the implications of a Supreme Court ruling are. You don't try to guess with them with someone who's about as clueless as you are. You get an actual paid for legal opinion from a lawyer. Where are we? 1225 it said. 2109. Let's see what 1225 was.
And I feel a little bit none the wiser. It seems like no one really does know what the practical implications of this ruling by the Supreme Court are going to be. I mean, what's your interpretation?
I don't know. I mean, to an extent we don't. Like, to an extent some of this stuff is going to have to play out. I don't know if I really have a problem with that. But these people do seem pretty clueless. And I think they're being a bit dense on purpose, if that makes sense. Okay, they kept this person on for Israel. We're not. I don't get into like Israel-Palestine stuff. I'm sorry. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
Evident about what this means. I'm like, well, no, you've not provided this. So it seems, again, as I said, very, very unsure, but I believe...
Yeah, so it does seem like they're ignoring the part where they say it's about, well, your birth as, your sex as observed at birth, which seems to have a 99.95% success rate. That's pretty good. It's a bit better than, oh, we'll just let people say what their gender is and that's it, because people lie. People aren't always very sane. People might change their mind from day to day, and that could cause issues in and of itself. So I don't know. I don't know what alternative these people want, except I do. It's for them to somehow have some magic thing that says they're a woman, which I don't know. I don't think you should be able to lie on your birth certificate. So I don't think legal sex should take any precedent over actual sex as observed at birth.
I think that it's unsettling and frustrating to me that no pro-trans groups were even asked to give evidence in this case. And in fact, a transgender lawyer was asked to give evidence, and she was rejected for this. So this is, again, unsettling to me.
And I suppose so our Supreme Court is quite different from the American Supreme Court, because the American Supreme Court, they've got this constitution which is written in stone, and when the Supreme Court says something, the president and Congress can't just override it, right? Because they have a division of power. In this country, I guess unless you're deporting people to El Salvador, apparently. Exactly. I mean, maybe we can make some exceptions now that Donald Trump's president, but in theory, you've got this separation of power, which means that the Supreme Court does actually have sort of authority which can't be overridden, unless you can change the constitution with a 2/3 majority, or whatever. In this country, if in theory if the Supreme Court says something the government doesn't like, they can just pass legislation the following day to say, okay, yeah, fair enough, that's how you interpret statute as it's currently in law, but we can just make some new laws or change the laws. So in theory, the Labour government could say, okay, you've come to that decision, maybe the Equalities Act was ambiguous, but we want to give our version of clarity, which is a law which makes it clear that changing rooms should be trans-inclusive, to say this sort of an example. I imagine we're not in a political environment where the Labour government is going to be inclined to do that. I suppose, what do you think about sort of that? Well, maybe this should be a question which is decided politically as a...
Yeah, things like Natalie Barnett's thing, I think that's going to bolster people like her. And it's a bit hilarious now that in that really shit Jammy Dodger video that I watched, him and his girlfriend were talking about, oh, I don't think this is even going to be like legal and stuff. Well, it's like, well, it sounds like it kind of is now. They're probably not going to retract that or make a correction or anything because these people suck, but hey.
Opposed to judicially, I don't know what you think.
I think that given the rulings can be given on the interpretation of this legislation in so many different directions at once by so many different people, that the legislation itself is too unclear. I think that this is a very, as far as I can see, very clear.
I think we're getting the measure of this. It's unclear. We don't know what's going to happen. Wow. We're pretending that sex isn't this fairly easily defined thing in well over 99% of cases, when science is rarely settled, when nothing is ever going to be perfect, and it's way better to do it that way than to go by people's gender identity. When gender identity is not observable, sex in the vast majority of cases is. And a lot of women are not happy about the idea of sharing these spaces with men. I'm sorry, man. Big congratulations. Okay, people are talking about Katy Perry. I don't care about that. Common sense has prevailed. Sanity. The idea that a legal definition of woman includes both biological women and anyone with a certificate was always preposterous. I agree with that. Like, on the one hand, you've got people that you're judging based on their biology, how they were born. On the other side, you've got someone with a certificate. Those things aren't equal. Those things don't make sense being put on the same level playing field or the same plane or whatever. Why don't Novara ever invite a gender-critical woman to these debates or even interview one? I mean, the argument they'd make here, wouldn't it be like, well, they get interviewed in loads of places, blah, blah, blah. What a surprise the trans activists are pulling a hard cope on this. They are kind of coping. The whole, oh, well, sex is more complicated than they're making out. It is a bit of a cope. I'm sorry about it. You know what your sex is in almost every case. You can't actually change your sex. It's not mutable. Two exceptionally sharp minds. I think this must be a joke. Listen, these aren't the worst people I've seen. I think the guy seems a bit dumb. And the trans woman doesn't seem... I think she's playing dumb a bit. Like, this isn't... I've seen a lot of extremely crazy, like, trans activists, and they don't sound like the worst ever. But then I don't know what they're like when they're not on Novara media. Like, I'm pretty sure their presence on the internet off of this is, like, substantially less, you know what I mean? So that maybe they're trying to be more professional. I don't know. I think I tried watching one or two things with this person. They hang out with people like Kevin Logan. I think Kevin Logan sucks. He's a sophist. He roundly fell for that whole Marcy Rankin thing, which I think is a massive fucking grift. But I guess we'll see on that front. It's telling we as a human society always needed sex marker words when they started using medical terms like AFAB and AMAB. Proof sex means something, and like they try and act doesn't. Yeah, Jesus. Yeah, and I mean AFAB and AMAB, that was like co-opted from intersex people, because you might be assigned sex at birth if something's wrong down there, and they have to do like a corrective surgery, or it's procedure to do that or something, whether it should be done or not, whether it has to be done or not, you know. And we've co-opted that, even though almost all of us have no issues with our sexual development. You know, it's really quite weird. We're fine with appropriation of genuinely probably quite marginalized people that genuinely probably have issues when it suits us. But hey, there we go, Novara Media. I can't really be bothered to finish this segment because they're just going round and round. Well, we don't know. Well, it's unclear. It needs clarifying, blah, blah, blah. Fascinating.